Okay, now we're in chapter 3. Okay. And we're talking about culture. All right, so that's the big to-do for this chapter. And again, like I said, anthropologists study this too, and really our big difference is we look at post-industrial revolution culture, with the idea being that if I'm studying the culture in Burma, right, and I'm studying it 200, 300, 400 years ago, that was a fairly self-contained thing, and you could track certain trade with other groups, right? But in the past 100 years, right, as industrialization's happened, that culture has had to interact, right? It's gone to war, it's been involved in wars, it's had to deal with other groups. So then its culture becomes much more entwined with other cultures and countries. So, what's your book say? Culture is comprised of values, beliefs, norms, rules, language, symbols, arts and artifacts, identities, and memories. So, one of the problems I have when we come to a chapter like this is that is almost everything. And if it's almost everything, it makes it very difficult to say what is culture and what isn't culture, right? So, here's what I would like to use for our culture discussion is it's your blueprint, right? So if you've ever traveled to a different country and things weren't working the way you expected them to work, your blueprint and what was going on maybe didn't jive. And a lot of people I know love that experience. They just think it's hunky and dory, and they're like, oh my God, it was so great. I didn't know what was going on, and I had to learn how to do this, that, and the other. And I'm like, yeah, that's often terrifying for me, like when I'm in another country and I'm not so good with the language and everything isn't working the way that I wanted it to, and then I'm like, I feel very much kind of like a lost 6-year-old because I don't, let's say, speak the language very well and I don't know the cultural assumptions. So here's one. If you get a chance, I always tell people, if you get a chance, spring break, you're in college, I get it. Almost everyone goes down to Mexico and practices power drinking and throwing up in perhaps Cancun. Okay, a choice. I would say go to Costa Rica. Better environment, just as much throwing up as any place else. And for me, the blueprint there, examples of blueprint not going right when I traveled there. Because this reminded me of Texas. You ever hear old people give you directions about what used to be there? Like, well, you go down there about 3 or 4 miles down there, that's where they used to have that old sawmill, and then you take a right there and you go, is the sawmill there anymore? No, burned down 50 years ago. Then why are you telling me where something used to be? That doesn't help me. But if you go to San Jose, Costa Rica, the capital, they will give you directions about the Plaza de Coca-Cola. This is where the big Coca-Cola bottle plant used to be. It's not there anymore, but everybody in the city knows. If you say Plaza de Coca-Cola, everybody knows what you're talking about. You just don't know where they're talking about. I walked around looking for a bus. I must have walked around about a half an hour, just a big circle. And finally, I just followed a bus. I just literally tracked a bus down like I was hunting it and followed it into this kind of what looked like a market-looking place with kind of a big open area. And there, really faded against one of the buildings, was a Coca-Cola sign. And I realized they're giving me directions in their cultural blueprint, right? It just wasn't helpful to me because I didn't know where the Plaza de Coca-Cola was. We break up culture into material and non-material culture. So material culture is stuff that I make, like this pen, right? Somebody made this pen. Now that is material culture. I took something and I made it into a pen. The ideas that I write down on the board are examples of non-material culture. So that's literature, poems, songs, laws, things that are non-material, but obviously clearly have a huge impact on how we do this culture thing, because they make up the, if you will, the rough edges of our blueprint map, right? That little legend at the bottom that tells you how to read a map, those are the non-material things, right? So your book is an example of both, right? Somebody printed it and bound it, that's material culture. The ideas in your book, non-material. Then we get to something called cultural universals. This is where we find examples of this in every culture. Okay, so some examples. Cuisine. Every culture has an idea of cuisine. And sometimes that can be really like alarming to us. So like escargot. Most Americans are like, snails. I got a problem with that. You know, I don't think I can eat a snail. Other people that have tried it are like, oh my God, gotta try the snails. And I'm like, do I really have to? I don't think I do. Sushi. A lot of people digging on the sushi. And I'm less about the sashimi non-cooked fish product. It's just my culture. I have a problem with it. On the other hand, just to give you an idea about how eventually all these will sort of interrelate, all the institutions and things that we're talking about, and I'll probably talk about it again, but they did this thing where a film crew went to France, looking at the different kinds of institutions about how they do public education, how we do public education. And lunch is a thing. It's actually part of the curriculum in France. Like they serve like a 5-course thing there. There's a soup and bread course, and often either a salad and a main thing, and then a dessert thing. And people learn manners in school, and they learn how to cook in school. And like once a week, you're part of this, like you serve your fellow people at the table, which I think is good for that idea of your food doesn't magically pop up by, you know, magic gnomes, that people make it, and that those people deserve, you know, respect and acknowledgement, where if we don't ever do that, then they're just the lunch ladies behind the counter with the plastic hats on, right? And when we can think of them as almost like non-people, right? So I really like that idea. So as a joke, one of the people in the film crew sent back, their child was in Philadelphia schools, and they go, this is what their lunch looked like. And it was on a styrofoam tray. And it was like a piece of that mystery square pizza. You remember getting that square pizza with the little like pepperoni bits? They weren't even full pepperonis, but pepperoni bits in the pizza, right? And it was carved into squares. And they showed the French kids, and the French kids were like, that's not food. That is no. You people eat that? Really? Wow. And what struck me was their reaction to our version of school pizza was the exact same reaction I had to, hey, would you like some snails? Right? Blueprint. Cultural universals, humor. Every culture has an idea of humor, except for maybe the French. What else? Example, here's one, because it's also good for tracking change. Tattoos. We uncovered a guy on top of an Italian mountain buried in the ice. It's called the Iceman. And he's like 10,000 years old. And I don't know what person did this because it's kind of creepy, but when they uncovered him and thawed him out and they were looking at all of his stuff, someone had the idea of, let's stretch his skin. Like, I don't know why they had that idea, but they stretched his skin because it was still intact, and he had made tattoos on him. So like tattooing is literally like 10,000 years old. We find examples of tattooing in Chinese society. Strange enough, there, it was something that the elite did. When I was growing up, because even though it's a universal, its meaning changes, right? When I was growing up, the only people that had tattoos were like bikers and like people that went to prison and whatever. Now, right, every drunk sorority girl on her 19th birthday, right, goes and gets one, and that's cool. But its meaning has changed, right? I mean, it's no longer like, hey, that's tough, or oh, I'm elite. Now it's like, I got drunk on 6th Street. And now, maybe sometime after class someone can explain the crawling lizard one. Like there's lots of different tattoos, but where they have the little salamander up their ankle, that one I don't understand. I'm understanding some flowers, hearts, butterflies. I get that one. I don't get the salamander. It's probably just me being an old fuddy-duddy. Why are cultural universals important? Well, rather than saying the Greeks influenced the Romans that influenced the Germans that influenced whatever, right? If they're universal and there's no way that you can find clear transmission, that's something that a group of people called sociobiologists, so make sure that's in your notes, because I can't remember if they talk about it in this chapter or not, but we're talking about it now. There's something about them, about these things like music and language, that we seem to biologically do, right? We've been able to say that every culture we've tracked has a spoken language, if not a written language. Music. There's something about, because I guess we can do this thing, we have this overdeveloped set of vocal cords, so we can sing, or at least some of us think that we can sing, you know, in our car loudly to the radio. We sound great, don't we? I know I do. The sociobiologists are looking at what's the connection between our physical personages, right, and societies and the cultures that we create. For instance, we have very little in the way of flying culture developed because we don't have wings, right? We have a lot of culture developed around running and walking because we can do those things, right? Does that make sense? Some of it is, you go, well, that's just being absurd. Is it? We have learned to fly machines in the past 100 years, and if you've noticed, there's been a huge uptick about the culture developed around flying. A 100 years ago, in 1924, we had finished the war, people could buy old airplanes, and people did something called barnstorming, which was like flying was this really neat oddity, and that people would just buy a plane and fly it, and that's all you had to do was buy a plane, right? Theoretically, being a pilot was something that you could just do for a while on your own, and you know, there weren't really laws around it. But eventually we created laws because people were doing dumb stuff with planes, and we were like, right, you got to be a pilot, you got to have some training, right? So we created culture around it, right? So that was something in which we were like, right, we don't have wings, but we eventually made things that do have wings. So we made some non-material culture to keep track of that material culture. Trying to think of another material culture thing that we do, that we tracked and we found in all other cultures. Hand gestures seem to be fairly universal, right? This one, what is this? Hook 'em horn. Don't make me fail all you people. Hook 'em horns. But if you're in Southern Europe, this also means that your mother may be getting around a lot. Yeah, so depending on where you're at, this could be a problem. I was amused that, so I think it was, I can't remember if it was the Korean or the Vietnamese. I think it was the Vietnamese War. The North Vietnamese had captured some of our guys, and they wanted to take a picture of them, that they were in good health, right? And they were, all right, they lined them all up and they put them in their uniforms so they looked good and whatever. And they said, smile. There's a guy behind the camera with a gun, smile. And they're all like smiling. And then they were shooting the bird to the camera because that was not a cultural known symbol. So when the picture got to us, so they were like, see, they're fine. Really? Are they fine? They don't, they're smiling, but they're giving us a universal symbol for our culture that isn't good. We want to talk about something called ethnocentrism. This is you evaluate and judge another culture based on one's own cultural norms and the belief that yours is basically superior, right? That's ethnocentrism. And I usually tend to think of this as what I call the ugly American. If you've ever done any traveling, maybe you've encountered this person where they're like, I found this in Costa Rica, we got off this bus, and we're looking at this waterfall, right? Beautiful, oh my God, waterfall. We don't have anything like that around here. It's like 80 feet drop off. It's gorgeous. Guy gets off the bus, and he's your typical American, well-fed, very loud, and he's like, "Oh my God, that's beautiful, Martha. Get the camera. You got to look at it. Oh my God, that's beautiful. Of course, I wouldn't want to live here." Really? You needed to add that last part? Really? That was important? Were the locals asking you to live amongst them? Please teach us about hamburgers. Please, oh fat American, explain us your ways. No! But even though they had spent money to take a plane to come to this place to see these beautiful things that are not present in their own country, they couldn't stop themselves from judging it by their own cultural standards and metrics. Obviously, the most extreme of this, ethnocentrism can actually result in the dehumanizing of another group and being able to advocate violence against a group. I found this very interesting going on about what's going on with the Palestinian-Israeli issue. People that are supporting Israel are saying, well, all you people that support Palestine, they don't like gays. And they wouldn't allow X, Y, or Z in the West. So in other words, I thought was interesting, so they're weaponizing ethnocentrism. So they're trying to say, American that supports the non-killing of children, you're a fool, because they wouldn't accept you in Palestinian culture if you were gay or a Christian or whatever. I thought, wow, it's kind of an artful use of this term. It's kind of twisted as well, but I saw what they were doing, right? So they were trying to say, look, you shouldn't support them because they wouldn't like you. I'm like, huh. Weaponization of ethnocentrism. Usually it's just straightforward, right? I'm a culture that has more guns or money, and then I think your culture is small and backwards, and I just take you over, right? But I think it's interesting now that they're like, right, but we also have to have a story that goes with it. Because it used to be straight up, we have the guns, we're in charge, right? It was very straightforward, very, colonial. What your book calls cultural imperialism. We show up, this is how it's going to be. So in your book, deliberate imposition of one's culture values on another culture. Back to what we were talking about with colonial mentality, right? Cultural imperialism. You will accept these things from us. And often that's problematic.